His mother's phone rang at 11 o'clock at night on the 4th of July, and when she picked up, the voice on the other end wasn't her son. It was one of his friends, calling to say that Nolan hadn't come back. Hadn't come back from an island 10 miles off the coast of Mississippi. An island with no bridge, no road, no way off unless someone put you on a boat. And just like that, a holiday weekend became a mother's worst nightmare. But here's the part that stopped investigators cold. When Christine Wansley tracked down her son's phone, it was clean. No photos, no videos, nothing from that entire day. Not a single piece of content from an 18-year-old who documented everything. An athlete who never went anywhere without capturing the moment. His phone looked like he'd never set foot on that island at all. So the question isn't just where Nolan Wells went. The question is, what happened in those hours between the last conversation anyone had with him and the moment a park ranger found a body floating in the Gulf waters? And why does it feel like every answer only opens up more questions? If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe right now, because we cover the cases that the news cycle moves on from too fast. This one is still unfolding, and you need to be here when it does. Let's go back to the beginning. Ocean Springs, Mississippi. If you've never been, picture a small Gulf Coast town with the kind of tight-knit energy where everybody knows everybody, where Friday nights in the fall mean football, where coaches remember your name years after you've graduated, and where the community shows up when one of its own needs something. That's the world Nolan Xavier Wells grew up in. Nolan was 18 years old, 6'1", built like someone who had been playing wide receiver his whole life, because he had. He had just graduated from Ocean Springs High School and was stepping into the next chapter. He had earned a spot on the roster at Southwest Mississippi Community College as a wide receiver. For a kid from a small Gulf Coast town, that was everything. That was the beginning of something real. His parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, had watched him work for it. This was their son, not just an athlete, but a young man with a future that was just starting to take shape. On the evening of July 3, 2026, Nolan was home with his family. He made salmon for dinner, sat with his parents. A normal night before a holiday weekend. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would have told Christine or Elmore that this was the last quiet evening they would ever have as a complete family. Nolan spent that night with friends ahead of the 4th of July weekend, preparing for something that had become completely routine for him, a boat trip out to Horn Island. He had been there multiple times before. He knew the place. His friends knew the place. It was the kind of trip young people along the Gulf Coast make every summer without a second thought. Now, for those of you watching from outside the South, let me put Horn Island in context. It is a barrier island, part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, sitting roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. There's no bridge, no road, no ferry schedule. The only way on or off that island is by private boat. The beaches out there are some of the most pristine and isolated stretches of shoreline you'll find anywhere in the country. And on a 4th of July weekend, that kind of isolation draws hundreds of boaters looking to get away from the crowds. Except, of course, everyone has the same idea, so it's not exactly isolated. It becomes its own kind of party. That's the world Nolan stepped into on the morning of July 4th, 2026. The group he arrived with made their way out to the northwest tip of the island. Photos from that afternoon show Nolan exactly as you'd expect to see him. Blue swim trunks, sunglasses on, arm around his people, smiling that wide, easy smile. A teenager on a holiday weekend without a care in the world. Those images would later be shared across the country as his mother begged for information. But in the moment they were taken, they were just another set of summer photos. The beach that day was crowded. Other boaters had the same idea. The atmosphere was festive, the way Gulf Coast 4th of July celebrations always are. Music, the smell of salt water, cold drinks, the kind of afternoon that feels like it should last forever. Strong currents moved through the water, the way they always do in that part of the Gulf. Conditions out there shift. The water doesn't care what day it is. Somewhere around 3 in the afternoon, things shifted. Nolan and his friends parted ways. According to the accounts his friends gave to investigators, Nolan told them he was good, that he had another group to ride back with, that he didn't need to leave with them. So they believed him. They got on their boat and they left. And that was the last confirmed moment anyone in his immediate circle placed eyes on Nolan Wells alive. Before we go further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and state in the comments. If you're somewhere on the Gulf Coast, if you've ever been out to Horn Island or anywhere along those Mississippi Barrier Islands, tell me what it's like. I want to know who's in the room with me on this one. Now, here's where the silence begins to feel wrong. The afternoon passed. Evening rolled in, the kind of warm Gulf Coast evening where the sky turns colors you can't quite describe. And Nolan didn't come home. No call to his parents, no text, no Snapchat, nothing. At 11 p.m., one of his friends made the call to Christine Wansley. He hadn't come back. Nobody could reach him. The mainland was miles away and her son was unaccounted for on an island he had no way to leave on his own. Christine didn't hesitate. She filed a missing persons report immediately. No waiting period, no second guessing. She knew her son, and something was already wrong. Then came the phone. Through a family friend, Christine was able to track Nolan's phone using Snapchat. It led her to a house on the mainland where multiple people were gathered. She retrieved it, and when she looked through it, the phone was clean, completely clean. No photos, no videos, nothing from the island that day. Now think about what that means for a second. Nolan Wells was an 18-year-old athlete who habitually documented his life, his outings, his moments, his people. The kind of young man who captured everything because that's just what his generation does. It's instinct. You go somewhere, you take photos. You do something, you film it. Yet on one of the most social, photogenic days of the entire year, July 4th, on a barrier island with his friends, there was nothing. Not one image, not one clip, not a single second of footage. That detail lit a fire under everyone paying attention. Was it deleted? Did someone clean the phone before it was handed over? Or did Nolan simply not document that day? There are no confirmed answers to that yet. But the absence of that digital footprint became one of the most discussed elements of the case from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, under Sheriff John Ledbetter, activated a search operation that was significant in scale. The U.S. Coast Guard was in the water. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources deployed resources. The National Park Service sent personnel. Volunteer groups, including the United Cajun Navy, a civilian search and rescue organization known across the South, joined the effort. Searchers moved across the island and combed the surrounding Gulf waters. Christine Wansley took to social media. She posted her son's photos. She described what he was wearing. She appealed to anyone at all, who had been on Horn Island that day and seen something. The posts spread. People shared them. A mother's voice cuts through noise in a way that press releases never can. For 2 days, the search continued. On July 6, 2026, a National Park Service ranger made a discovery near the northwest shoreline of Horn Island, a body in the water. Dental records confirmed it was Nolan Xavier Wells. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind examined the body and noted no immediate signs of physical injury. However, and this is important, the body's condition was significant enough that the state medical examiner's office took over handling the autopsy. Toxicology and additional testing were ordered. Results were pending. No cause of death, no manner of death, nothing official yet. And then Sheriff Ledbetter made a statement that immediately created friction. He said, early on, that no foul play was suspected. That Nolan had chosen to remain on the island, expecting to get a ride back to the mainland with another group. On the surface, that might sound plausible. People make plans. Plans change. Except, the people who knew Nolan best pushed back on that explanation almost immediately. His friends described him as someone who always, without exception, returned to the mainland with the same group he arrived with. That was just his pattern. His character. The kind of reliability that people who love you notice and depend on. So right away, there's a gap between the sheriff's early framing and the portrait drawn by the people who knew Nolan. That gap would only widen. Real quick, if you're finding this case as layered as I am, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. And I promise you, we are just getting into it. Keep watching. On July 7th, the family retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump. If you follow high-profile cases, you know that name. Crump announced that the family would not be accepting any early conclusions. They wanted answers. They wanted transparency. And they were going to pursue an independent autopsy, meaning an examination performed by a pathologist entirely unaffiliated with Mississippi authorities, someone with no relationship to the local system. The body was flown to Washington, D.C. for that independent examination. And the person who funded that independent autopsy? Colin Kaepernick. He stepped in, quietly and directly, to make sure the Wells family had access to an examination they could trust. On July 10th, Christine and Elmore Wansley held a press conference alongside Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton. The family was specific about what was bothering them. They described difficulty retrieving Nolan's car keys from friends. They highlighted inconsistencies in the accounts of his final hours, stories that didn't quite line up, details that shifted when pressed. And they made clear they were not going to let this become another case where a young man's death gets filed away without real answers. The national response was swift. Tyler Perry covered the full cost of Nolan's funeral arrangements entirely. Media executive Byron Allen contributed to a fund established in Nolan's name. Reverend Sharpton pledged $50,000 from the National Action Network for any information that could lead to real answers in this case. These weren't symbolic gestures. These were people putting real weight behind a family that was fighting to be heard. The case had gone national, and with national attention came something that investigations dread: a flood of unverified information spreading faster than facts could be confirmed. Here's where I need to slow down and separate what we know from what the internet decided it knew. A video began circulating online, purportedly captured on Horn Island that day, showing an argument. People latched onto it immediately. Was that Nolan? Was someone threatening him? The speculation moved fast and loud, but then Tristan Shepard, also referred to publicly as Tristan Shepard, came forward and confirmed that the voice in that argument was his own, not Nolan's. Nolan was not the person arguing in that video. Then there was a photograph that circulated widely online, believed by many to show Nolan alive after July 4th. People held it up as evidence that the timeline didn't add up, that someone had seen him after he was supposed to have disappeared. Investigators looked into it. The photo was taken on June 27th, a full week before July 4th, at a pool party. It had nothing to do with the day he went missing. Two major pieces of online evidence, a voice and a photograph, both turned out to be misidentified. Sheriff Ledbetter acknowledged publicly that misinformation was spreading faster than verified facts, and that it was actively complicating the investigation. When people are piecing together a case with wrong puzzle pieces, the real picture gets harder to find. I want to know what you think. Comment below right now. What do you believe happened on that island? And what's the weather like where you are? I'm serious. I always want to know who's sitting with me on these cases. Now, let's talk about Katie. Of all the threads in this investigation, the one involving the young woman identified publicly only as Katie may be the most consequential, because Katie was with Nolan on Horn Island that day. She is, as far as investigators and the family have been able to establish, one of the last people to have a real conversation with him. Her mother, Gracie McCormick, posted publicly in the early days of the case to confirm that Katie had indeed been with Nolan and had already reached out to the Wells family. That confirmation landed in the middle of the wildfire of online speculation, and it meant that for nearly 2 weeks, people were making assumptions about what Katie said, what she saw, and what she knew, without Katie having spoken publicly herself. Her account traveled secondhand, first through a family friend, then through her mother stepping in on social media to correct specific rumors that had gotten out of hand. Katie, a young woman barely out of her teens, became a central figure in a nationally followed case. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, connected to someone whose story the entire country was now watching. Around July 15th, something important happened. Christine Wansley and Katie sat down face to face. According to Christine, here is what Katie told her. She spent time with Nolan on the island that afternoon. At some point, they parted ways. She boarded a boat with her own friends and returned to the mainland. Before they separated, Nolan told Katie his plan. He said he was going to rejoin his friends and get back to the mainland. That's what he said. That was his stated intention. And Katie believed him. But here is the sentence that defines everything still unresolved about this case. Katie never personally saw Nolan board any boat after they parted ways. Read that again. He told her his plan. She believed his plan. She left. And she never saw him execute that plan with her own eyes. That is the gap. That is the space this entire investigation lives in. Between the moment Nolan Wells told Katie he was heading back and the moment a ranger found him in the water, there is nothing confirmed. No witness who saw him get on a boat. No confirmed sighting. No digital record. Nothing. That gap is where the truth is. And as of now, nobody has been able to fill it. The same week that Christine met with Katie, the FBI's Jackson Field Office issued its first comprehensive public statement about its role in the case. And the statement was very specific about something that had been misunderstood in public coverage. The FBI was not leading the investigation into how Nolan Wells died. That investigation belonged to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. It was their case. They were the lead agency, and they had been throughout. The FBI's involvement was different. Federal agents had been brought in at the local department's request, drawing on an established working relationship between the agencies on complex cases. What specifically triggered federal jurisdiction? Threats. Threats serious enough and traveling far enough across state lines via phone and internet to fall under federal law. People connected to this case, people whose only crime was proximity to a high-profile story, were receiving threatening communications, and the threats were real enough that they warranted a federal response. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole made a public statement confirming that she herself had received threats tied to the Nolan Wells case. Judge Cole had no direct investigative role in this matter. She had a personal connection. That was the full extent of it. And yet threats tied to this case found their way to her. That is the kind of reach this story had developed, and the kind of collateral damage that comes when a case goes national before the facts have been sorted. The FBI statement made clear that its agents were working the threat cases as a separate track from the death investigation. Two parallel federal threads, two separate sets of questions, both active. On July 15th, Nolan's parents sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath alongside Ben Crump. The meeting produced a significant development. The investigation's results would go before a grand jury. That's a formal legal process, and it's important to understand what it means and what it doesn't. Grand jury referral is standard procedure for deaths that are suspicious or unnatural in nature. It does not, on its own, confirm that anyone committed a crime. It means a jury of citizens will review the evidence and determine whether there is enough to proceed further. The family and law enforcement also agreed to a coordinated review of Nolan's cell phone. Independent experts working alongside official findings, not against them. Sheriff Ledbetter reaffirmed publicly that the family deserved a thorough and factual investigation. He acknowledged the difficulty of doing that work in the middle of a national spotlight and a wave of unverified information. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore issued a public statement expressing skepticism. He referenced what he described as a prior unrelated case that he felt had failed to produce an indictment despite strong evidence, and he stated plainly that he would be watching the Wells case closely to make sure it didn't stall in a similar way. Other legal observers noted that his skepticism, while understandable, shouldn't color a process that hadn't yet run its course. As of the day Nolan was laid to rest, 2 autopsies remained pending: the state examination, the independent examination, no cause of death, no manner of death, nothing released. Investigators were still actively collecting original unedited photos and videos from anyone who had been on the northwest tip of Horn Island on July 4th, still seeking witness accounts of anything unusual. An argument, a disturbance, a moment that didn't feel right. The digital record of that day was being reconstructed piece by piece. July 20th, 2026. Center Point Church, Ocean Springs, Mississippi. The town that raised Nolan Wells came to say goodbye to him, under a sky that had no business being as clear and beautiful as it probably was. Visitation ran from 9 to 11 in the morning. Then the service began. Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy. And if you know anything about Reverend Sharpton, you know that when he speaks at a moment like this, he doesn't let anyone in the room look away from what's at stake. He speaks to the family. He speaks to the community. And he speaks to everyone watching. Funeral arrangements were handled entirely by Lockett Williams Mortuary in Gulfport. Tyler Perry had already ensured that cost was not something this family would have to carry. That was a real thing, a real act. The service was open to family, friends, and media. Coaches who had watched Nolan develop as an athlete, neighbors who had watched him grow up on their street, teachers who had seen him in classrooms, teammates who had lined up beside him on Friday nights under those Mississippi lights. All of them gathered in one place to account for 18 years of a life that ended before it had a chance to really begin. After the service, Christine Wansley did something that said everything about the kind of mother she is and the kind of son Nolan was. Instead of a traditional repass, she organized a celebration of life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. Her reasoning was simple and devastating in its clarity. She wanted the focus to be on who Nolan was, not on what happened to him, not on the investigation, the attorneys, the press conferences, or the national cameras, just on her son, just on the 18 years they had with him. Amid everything she had been through, the sleepless nights, the press conference, the fight for answers, the threats, the flood of speculation, the weight of burying a child, Christine Wansley stood at the center of a celebration and tried to give people a reason to remember Nolan for his life, not his death. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary thing. But the celebration of life ended, and the investigation did not. Here's where we stand. 2 autopsies, both pending results. The state medical examiner's examination and the independent examination performed in Washington, D.C., neither has produced a public finding as of this video. No cause of death, no manner of death, nothing definitive. A grand jury process is underway. The results of the investigation will be reviewed by citizens who will determine whether the evidence warrants further legal action. That process takes time, and it should. The FBI continues its separate work on the interstate threat cases, the threats directed at people connected to this story, including a sitting judge who had nothing to do with the investigation beyond knowing the people involved. Nolan's cell phone is being reviewed by independent digital experts working alongside official investigators. What they find, or don't find, will matter. And investigators are still out there asking for original, unedited media from anyone who was on Horn Island on July 4th. Photos, videos, anything captured that day that hasn't been filtered or cropped or edited. Because the truth of what happened in those hours is somewhere in that raw record, if it exists at all. Every person pulled into this story paid a price for being near it. Nolan's friends, who made a decision to leave the island and have lived with that decision ever since. Katie, who had a conversation on a beach with a young man she didn't know would become a missing person before sundown, and who spent 2 weeks as the subject of national speculation before she could speak for herself. Judge Ashley Cole, who received threats for having a personal connection to the story. The Wells family, who had to fight for basic transparency while simultaneously planning a funeral for their 18-year-old son under a national spotlight that never dimmed. And Nolan himself, a wide receiver from Ocean Springs with a scholarship, a future, and a habit of always coming back with the group he arrived with. 2 weeks after the body was found, the central question had not changed. What happened between the last conversation on Horn Island and the moment the water gave him back? What filled that gap? Who else was there? What does the digital record, once fully reconstructed, actually show? Nobody has answered that yet, not officially. And until both autopsy results are released, until the grand jury completes its review, until the cell phone examination is finished, the only honest thing to say is, we don't know. What we do know is that Christine Wansley is not going to stop. Ben Crump is not going to stop. And the people watching this case, people like you, right now, wherever you are not going to let it disappear. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He made dinner with his parents the night before he died. He smiled for photos on a Gulf Coast beach on the 4th of July. He told a young woman he was planning to get back to the mainland. And then he didn't. If this case is sitting with you, and I believe it should, subscribe to this channel right now. We will cover every development as it comes. When those autopsy results drop, we will be here. When the grand jury process moves, we will be here. When investigators release new findings, we will be here. This is not a story we are moving on from. Leave a comment and tell me, what question from this case is weighing on you the most? Is it the phone? Is it the gap between Katie's last conversation with Nolan and the discovery of his body? Is it the threats that found their way to a judge with no direct role in the case? Tell me what's sitting with you heaviest, and share this video, because Nolan's story deserves more eyes on it. His family deserves more people asking questions. The truth deserves more people demanding it. I'll see you in the next one.